Prince Rogers Nelson was officially declared dead from an accidental fentanyl overdose. That conclusion arrived quickly, neatly, and with surprising finality. But from the very beginning, the timeline surrounding his death never fully aligned. There were gaps, silences, decisions that were made, and others that were quietly avoided. On the 21st of April 2016, Prince was found unresponsive inside an elevator at Paisley Park. The image itself was stark. Not a hospital bed, not a private bedroom, but a confined space meant for movement, not rest. Within weeks, the case was effectively closed. Cause of death determined. File sealed. History moved on. But according to later reports, just 6 days earlier, Prince had already crossed a medical threshold that should have changed everything. On the 15th of April 2016, his private jet made an emergency landing in Illinois. This was not turbulence. This was not fatigue. Paramedics boarded the plane and administered Narcan, a drug used specifically to reverse opioid overdoses. Prince was revived. And then, remarkably, he was sent home instead of being hospitalized. Years later, Dr. Michael Schulenberg, a physician connected to Prince's final medical care, broke his silence with a brief but chilling admission. "I regret it." He did not claim the autopsy was wrong. He did not allege murder. Instead, he suggested that a crucial medical detail, something that explained what Prince had been enduring long before that final dose, was never properly documented. What exactly was missing from Prince's autopsy? And why did that omission make his death so easy to label as an accident? Chapter 1. The Body Begins to Fail. By 2014, Prince was already living with a contradiction few outside his inner circle fully understood. Publicly, he remained a symbol of control, discipline, and near superhuman productivity. Privately, his body was beginning to betray him. That year, Prince underwent hip surgery, later confirmed by Rolling Stone. The severity of the condition, the recovery plan, and the long-term consequences were never explained publicly. There was no medical briefing, no follow-up statement, just Prince, returning to the spotlight as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Those who saw him up close noticed it first. His walk slowed, his movements became deliberate. Longtime collaborators later recalled that the artist, once known for restless, athletic performances, now measured every step carefully. He still rehearsed obsessively. He still demanded perfection. But pain had entered the equation, and it was no longer subtle. By 2015, the signs became harder to ignore. Prince began using mechanical lifts to reach stages. Video footage shows him gripping railings, pausing before stepping up, bracing himself in ways that felt unfamiliar for someone once defined by physical dominance. Major outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian noted that he increasingly performed seated, often behind a piano. Officially, this was framed as artistic evolution, intimacy, maturity, minimalism. Unofficially, it was pain management. What made this period especially unsettling wasn't just physical decline, but how carefully it was insulated from public acknowledgement. There was no discussion of chronic pain, no admission of dependency, no visible treatment plan. Prince's image remained intact, disciplined, drug-free, fiercely independent. Behind the scenes, however, daily life had become a negotiation with pain. Prince distrusted hospitals. He disliked institutional medicine. Friends later said he minimized his condition, brushing off concern, insisting he was fine even when movement itself required effort. Control mattered more than transparency. Privacy mattered more than precaution. In 2015, his schedule remained punishing. Late-night studio sessions, long rehearsals, touring plans that ignored visible strain. To the outside world, this looked like resilience. To those watching closely, it looked like denial. Assistants quietly adjusted logistics. Elevators replaced stairs. Walking routes shortened. These were not dramatic collapses, but subtle adaptations, each one signaling that something fundamental had shifted. Yet none of it entered the official record. There was no acknowledgement of a chronic condition, no documentation of long-term pain treatment. On paper, Prince was healthy. That contradiction, visible decline paired with institutional silence, became the first fault line, and in retrospect, it would prove fatal. Chapter 2. The 15th of April 2016. The warning that was ignored. The 15th of April 2016 should have changed everything. Instead, it became the moment history quietly looked the other way. That morning, Prince boarded his private jet after a show in Atlanta, heading back to Minnesota. From the outside, it looked like another routine flight. No announcement, no alarm, no hint that this would be the last stretch of public normalcy anyone would ever see. Mid-flight, something went wrong. As the plane crossed into Illinois airspace, Prince's condition reportedly deteriorated fast enough that the pilot requested an emergency landing at Quad City International Airport in Moline, Illinois. This wasn't framed as a minor issue. This wasn't a bad night's sleep. It was a crisis severe enough to divert a private aircraft immediately. When paramedics boarded the jet, they didn't treat dehydration. They didn't administer oxygen as a simple precaution. According to reports later echoed across major outlets, they administered Narcan, a medication used to reverse opioid overdoses. That single detail mattered more than everything that came after. Narcan isn't given because someone looks tired. It's given when there is reason to believe opioids are suppressing breathing and threatening life. In other words, the story had already crossed into proximity to death territory. Prince was revived on the tarmac. He was alive, and this was the first moment the system should not have let him walk away. Yet, within hours, he did. Prince reportedly declined long-term hospitalization. He didn't remain under medical observation. He didn't enter a detox facility. By the same day, he was back in Minnesota, returning to Paisley Park as if the emergency landing had been nothing more than an interruption. This decision became one of the most troubling points in the entire timeline, because in standard medical practice, a patient revived with Narcan is considered high risk for relapse within hours. Opioids can outlast the antidote. Respiratory failure can return. Monitoring is not optional, it's essential. And yet, Prince was released. What shocked people wasn't only what happened, it was what didn't happen next. There was no press conference, no official medical statement describing severity, no clear acknowledgement that Prince had narrowly survived a potentially fatal event. For many fans, the story flickered online and disappeared. But inside his inner circle, the atmosphere reportedly changed. According to later reporting, people close to him understood what Narcan meant. They knew this wasn't a flu. Some urged further intervention. Some feared he was in immediate danger. But those fears did not become a documented plan. No doctor remained with him around the clock. No mandatory observation period followed. No structured follow-up care was set in place. On paper, the moment passed without consequence. This is where the timeline becomes dangerous. From April 15 onward, Prince was officially alive, mobile, and free to go home. But medically, the context had changed permanently. Once Narcan enters the story, the threshold is crossed. It means the body has already reached a point where survival required external reversal. In plain terms, it suggests Prince had already brushed death once and been pulled back. Yet when he was found dead 6 days later, the public narrative narrowed instantly to toxicology. Fentanyl. Accidental overdose. The story began at the ending, not the middle. April 15 wasn't treated like the main warning, it became a footnote. And that footnote mattered, because the difference between a sudden accident and a progressive medical crisis lives in context. Context is built through moments like April 15. When those moments are minimized, the death that follows becomes easier to label, easier to close, easier to dismiss. In the final record, the emergency landing, the Narcan, and the decision to send him home collapsed into background noise. They did not redefine responsibility. They did not slow the rush to closure. They did not force a deeper interrogation of how preventable the outcome might have been. In black file terms, this doesn't read like an innocent oversight. It reads like a familiar pattern. When a system wants a death to stay uncomplicated, it starts by shrinking the moments that made it preventable. The 15th of April 2016 was the day death announced itself in advance, and somehow it wasn't counted. Chapter 3. April 15 to the 21st of April 2016. 6 days of silence. If April 15 was the warning, then the 6 days that followed were the collapse. From the moment Prince returned to Paisley Park after the emergency landing in Illinois, the timeline entered a medically critical window, and yet it unfolded with no structure, no supervision, and no safety net. Between April 16 and April 20, Prince reportedly spent most of his time inside the Paisley Park complex, a place built for creativity and control, not emergency care. There was no doctor stationed on site, no nurse monitoring vital signs, no protocol for post-overdose observation. In standard medical practice, a patient revived with Narcan should be monitored closely because the antidote can wear off while opioids remain active in the body. Risk doesn't reset, it returns. In Prince's case, that risk window didn't last a night. It stretched into nearly a week of quiet. According to later reporting, concern did exist, but it moved privately, without authority. People in his orbit exchanged calls and messages expressing fear. Some believed he sounded weak. Some worried he wasn't eating. There were conversations about whether he should seek further medical care. But nothing escalated into decisive intervention. No emergency physician was summoned. No ambulance was called. No mandatory observation was imposed. Responsibility remained diffuse, shared by everyone, and therefore claimed by no one. Paisley Park during those days appeared calm from the outside. Staff came and went, lights stayed on, equipment remained in place. If you walked past the building, nothing would have looked urgent. But internally, those who saw Prince described something different. Polite, alert, yet fragile in a way that didn't feel temporary. He avoided long walks. Elevators replaced stairs. Movement stayed limited, not a dramatic collapse, a slow narrowing of space. A man conserving energy, not recovering it. What makes this stretch especially disturbing is not just the absence of medical oversight, but the presence of prior knowledge. Everyone involved knew about the emergency landing. Everyone knew Narcan had been used. That information alone should have triggered heightened vigilance. Instead, it became background noise, acknowledged, but not acted on. Then came a detail that later surfaced quietly, almost buried in the reporting. On April 21, day before his death, Prince reportedly made a call seeking help for what was described as a medical issue. According to accounts, arrangements were being discussed to connect him with a physician specializing in addiction medicine. But the response did not become immediate care. The meeting was tentatively planned for the next morning. Prince never reached that morning. That single fact changes the emotional temperature of the entire timeline. It suggests that something was recognized, at least briefly, that the danger was understood and that action was attempted, but the system moved too slowly. The window had already narrowed from days to hours, and these 6 days left almost no record, no detailed symptom logs, no documented check-ins, no measurements of how he was doing hour by hour. When the story was later summarized publicly, the timeline jumped from April 15 to April 21, as if nothing meaningful happened in between. But something did happen. Time passed. The body strained. Tolerance shifted, risk intensified, and then the silence ended. On the morning of April 21, at approximately 9:43 a.m., a call went to emergency services from Paisley Park. Prince was found unresponsive inside an elevator. No signs of struggle, no witness to the collapse, no documented escalation in the final minutes. In the last moments, he was alone. What followed would be documented carefully. Discovery, toxicology, conclusion. What preceded it remained fragmented, indirect, incomplete. Yet, those 6 days may hold the most important question in the entire case. Was Prince's death a sudden accident or the final step in a chain of ignored warnings? In black file terms, gaps are never neutral. They point to moments when action could have been taken and wasn't. And in this case, the absence is overwhelming. 6 days, no monitoring, no enforced care, one delayed attempt to reach help, and a body already flagged as high risk. So the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly happened inside Paisley Park during those 6 days, and why was no one willing or able to step in before it was too late? Because when history reduces a death to a single-word overdose, it erases the chapter where it might still have been prevented. And silence, once again, chose otherwise. Chapter 4. Death and the Autopsy File. At 9:43 a.m., On the 21st of April 2016, a call came in from Paisley Park. Prince had been found unresponsive inside an elevator. The discovery was quiet. There were no broken doors, no overturned furniture, no signs of struggle. When responders arrived, there was nothing left to reverse. Prince Rogers Nelson was pronounced dead at the scene. Almost immediately, the setting raised questions no report fully answered. The elevator was not a place of rest. It was a transitional space. Why was he there alone? Had he felt something was wrong and tried to move? Had his body failed mid-motion? The official record did not speculate. It documented position, time, and condition, then moved forward. Within hours, law enforcement secured Paisley Park. Media narratives followed fast. Even before toxicology results were finalized, the framing had begun to settle. A tragic loss, likely accidental. A superstar undone by a substance. The groundwork for closure was laid early. Investigators soon focused on pills recovered at the scene, some later identified as counterfeit medication containing fentanyl. From that moment on, the center of gravity shifted. The question became what Prince took, not what had been happening to his body in the weeks, months, and years before. This narrowing mattered, because as the investigation leaned into toxicology, everything that preceded April 21 began to fade. The emergency landing, the Narcan revival, the 6 days without supervision, the reported phone call seeking help, all of it receded into background context instead of defining evidence. On the 4th of June 2016, the Midwest Medical Examiner released the official autopsy report. The conclusion was clear: fentanyl toxicity. The manner of death was ruled accidental. From a technical standpoint, the report did its job. It identified the substance. It quantified levels. It followed forensic protocol. What it did not do was reconstruct the path that led there. There was no extended analysis of Prince's documented physical decline, no examination of chronic pain following hip surgery, no contextualization of the April 15 overdose reversal, no exploration of the 6-day window where medical monitoring should have been mandatory. The autopsy froze time at the moment of death, then built its conclusion outward from that single point. In doing so, it transformed a process into an event. This distinction is critical. Autopsies explain how a body stops functioning. They do not automatically explain why that outcome became likely. But by isolating fentanyl as the dominant fact, the report allowed the death to be understood as sudden rather than progressive, accidental rather than foreseeable. Another detail reinforced that framing. Investigators later acknowledged that Prince likely did not know he was ingesting fentanyl. The drug was hidden inside pills made to resemble a less potent medication. This strengthened the narrative of accident, no intent, no recklessness. But it also raised a harder question. If intent was absent, then vulnerability had to be present. That vulnerability, physical pain, reduced mobility, isolation, and a recent overdose reversal never entered the official summary in a meaningful way. Toxicology was documented. Decline was not. Within weeks, the public conversation faded. Tributes replaced questions. Prince joined the long list of artists whose deaths were reduced to a single substance and a date. The file was closed. But years later, when individuals connected to Prince's final care spoke cautiously about regret, they did not dispute the chemistry. They questioned the framing. They suggested that while the autopsy was accurate, it was incomplete in spirit, that it captured the ending without acknowledging the chapters that made that ending likely. In black file terms, this is where responsibility begins to dissolve. When the last page is precise but the middle chapters are missing, the story becomes easier to accept and harder to challenge. The autopsy answered how Prince died. It did not answer whether the death could have been prevented. And once the file was closed, that question was no longer required to be asked. Chapter 5. The Missing Detail. Years after Prince's death had been sealed with a single conclusion, the story quietly reopened, not through new toxicology, not through conspiracy, but through regret. Dr. Michael Schulenberg, the Minnesota physician connected to Prince's final medical care, eventually spoke words that landed heavier than any accusation. "I regret it." He did not say the autopsy was wrong. He did not claim Prince was murdered. Instead, according to reports and legal filings, he suggested that something essential was missing, a medical reality that explained what Prince had been enduring long before fentanyl ever entered the picture. That missing detail was not chemistry, it was decline. In civil actions brought by Prince's estate, the argument was not that fentanyl was absent. It was that Prince had been failed before it became fatal. The filings pointed to a pattern. Chronic pain following hip surgery, diminished mobility, increasing vulnerability, and a critical post-overdose window after April 15 that should have triggered aggressive medical oversight, but didn't. The estate's position was simple and devastating. If Prince's death was the foreseeable outcome of unmanaged pain and inadequate follow-up after a Narcan revival, then calling it an accident obscured responsibility, not malicious intent omission. The lawsuit questioned how care decisions were made around a patient whose privacy and status allowed normal safeguards to loosen. High-profile patients often receive bespoke treatment, but bespoke care without protocol can become dangerous. In Prince's case, privacy replaced precaution, control replaced escalation. One detail sharpened this argument even further. Investigators concluded Prince likely did not know he was taking fentanyl. The drug was hidden inside counterfeit pills made to resemble a less potent medication. This eliminated intent, but it amplified vulnerability. A body weakened by pain, isolation, and a recent overdose reversal does not need recklessness to reach a fatal outcome. It only needs exposure. And yet, none of this entered the autopsy in a way that mattered. The report documented the substance. It did not document the conditions that made the substance lethal. It closed the file on the last moment without reopening the days and years that made that moment predictable. In medical terms, regret often follows outcomes that were statistically foreseeable once warning thresholds were crossed. April 15 was such a threshold. Narcan does not reset risk, it confirms it. But the official story treated it as a prelude, not a red line. So why wasn't the broader medical arc written into the record? Because scope determines responsibility. An autopsy answers how a person died. A full narrative asks whether the death could have been prevented. One closes a case, the other opens accountability. Prince's family sought those missing chapters through the courts. A doctor later acknowledged their absence. The record, however, remained closed. And that leaves the final question, the one that still lingers beneath the music, the tributes, and the official conclusion. Was Prince lost to a single accident, or was he lost to a chain of choices, delays, and silences no one wanted fully documented? Because when the final page is accurate but the middle chapters are missing, history doesn't just simplify a death, it